morning, 8x2. I hope you're doing well on this fine Friday morning. So we continue with our remote learning. I hope it's gone well for you this week. And together we're going to move on into chapter 1 of Oliver Twist. Last week you did some work on the workhouses and you did some research there. And today we're going to move on to actually reading some of the book. Now, we're not going to read the book all the way through. It's far too long for us to get done in the 6 lessons or so that we have. But we are going to read chapter 1 of the actual book before we move on to a slightly different version that pulls out key extracts for us. So, without using up any more of your valuable time, let's go straight into our lesson. So, before we begin, let's have a look at the questions we're going to be trying to answer today. The first thing you need to do is this list of vocabulary. 5 words from chapter 1. Prudent, inestimable, burden, calico, and drudge. I'm going to suggest that you go and have a look at those right now. You can use Google, you can use your dictionary, you can use dictionary.com, you can use any resource you have available and just fill in those 5 words before we begin the reading. So, please go do that now. Okay, so I'll trust that you've done those 5 vocabulary words now, which means that when we begin the reading and we come across those words, you'll understand what they mean, hopefully. Now, we're going to go into a reading of chapter 1 and we can read it together. Please follow along with me as I read it for you, because as we go along, I'm going to stop at a few points to explore some of what Dickens is doing with the chapter to help you answer the questions you can see in front of you. You can see here 3 comprehension questions. So the first one is, what do the following phrases mean or suggest to you as a reader? Now there's 3 phrases here that I'm going to ask you to rewrite in, say, a simpler English. So when Dickens says, it was ushered into this world of sorrow and trouble, what does that actually mean? Or, it remained a matter of considerable doubt whether the child would survive to bear any name at all. What is Dickens saying? The fact is that there was considerable difficulty in inducing Oliver to take upon himself the office of respiration. It's a rather long-winded or roundabout way of saying something. What is Dickens saying there? Now, there's a reason why Dickens uses this heavier language, and there's a lot of humor in the way he says it, but sometimes that humor is difficult to appreciate if you're wrestling with the language itself. Question number 2. The reader is told in the 3rd paragraph that Oliver and nature fought out to the point between them. The result was that after a few struggles, Oliver breathed, sneezed, and on it goes. How does that present the character of Oliver Twist? This is the very first thing the character, the main character, the protagonist of this novel, the very first thing he does is has this fight with nature, and he wins. What does that tell us about the character of Oliver Twist, do you think? And in chapter 3, wrapped in the blanket, which had hitherto formed his only covering, he might have been the child of a nobleman or a beggar. What is Dickens maybe saying about social class? And this is a trickier question. What is he saying about the way a person is presented in this final paragraph, which is at the end or near the end of the 1st chapter? So Oliver Twist is born as a baby, his mother dies, and he gets wrapped up in clothes, and Dickens has this thing to say about the way Oliver Twist is dressed or wrapped in a blanket for the first time. And that might be getting at something that the whole novel is about. Okay, so enough of looking at the questions, let's begin the reading of the chapter itself. Oliver Twist, or The Parish Boy's Progress, by Charles Dickens. Chapter 1. Treats of the place where Oliver Twist was born and the circumstances attending his birth. Among other public buildings in a certain town, which for many reasons it will be prudent to refrain from mentioning, and to which I will assign no fictitious name, there is one anciently common to most towns, great or small, to wit, a workhouse. And in this workhouse was born, on a day and date which I need not trouble myself to repeat, insomuch as it can be of no possible consequence to the reader, in this stage of the business at all events, the item of mortality, whose name is prefixed to the head of this chapter. For a long time after it was ushered into this world of sorrow and trouble by the parish surgeon, it remained a matter of considerable doubt whether the child would survive to bear any name at all. In which case it is somewhat more than probable that these memoirs would never have appeared, or if they had, that being comprised within a couple of pages, they would have possessed the inestimable merit of being the most concise and faithful specimen of biography extant in the literature of any age or country. Okay, at this point, you can have a go at trying to answer those first two bullets. We've read them now. It was ushered into this world of sorrow and trouble. It remained a matter of considerable doubt whether the child would survive to bear any name at all. Dickens is talking about the birth of a child in a workhouse in horrible conditions and is suggesting that the child might not even survive. So there's actually something quite tragic, quite horrible happening, but he's balancing that with a really dry sense of humor. When he says they would have possessed the inestimable merit of being the most concise and faithful specimen of biography, he's kind of joking that if he was writing the biography of Oliver Twist, which is what the novel is in a way, well, it would be a very faithful one, it would be a very honest or true one, because it'd be extremely short. If the baby is born and dies within minutes, well, that's a very short biography. So there's a real dark humor there to kind of running underneath the main story here. In any case, please try and answer those first couple questions, and we'll carry on with reading the next paragraph or two. Although I am not disposed to maintain that the being born in a workhouse is in itself the most fortunate and enviable circumstance that can possibly befall a human being, I do mean to say that in this particular instance it was the best thing for Oliver Twist that could by possibility have occurred. The fact is that there was considerable difficulty in inducing Oliver to take upon himself the office of respiration, a troublesome practice, but one which custom has rendered necessary to our easy existence. And for some time he lay gasping on a little flock mattress, rather unequally poised between this world and the next, the balance being decidedly in favour of the latter. Now, if, during this brief period, Oliver had been surrounded by careful grandmothers, anxious aunts, experienced nurses, and doctors of profound wisdom, he would most inevitably and indubitably have been killed in no time. There being nobody by, however, but a pauper old woman who was rendered rather misty by an unwonted allowance of beer, and a parish surgeon who did such matters by contract, Oliver and nature fought out the point between them. The result was that, after a few struggles, Oliver breathed, sneezed, and proceeded to advertise to the inmates of the workhouse the fact of a new burden having been imposed upon the parish, by setting up as loud a cry as could reasonably have been expected from a male infant who had not been possessed of that very useful appendage, a voice, for a much longer space of time than 3 minutes and a quarter. And so our second question is based on what we've just read. We've just read about the birth and first breath of Oliver Twist. And we get this wonderful line, Oliver and nature fought out the point between them. The result was that after a few struggles, Oliver breathed, sneezed, and proceeded to advertise to the inmates of the workhouse the fact of a new burden having been imposed upon the parish. So, as the very first action that Oliver Twist takes, as I said at the beginning of the lesson, what is this saying about him? What kind of a person is Oliver Twist, do you think? And you can see it here within the full paragraph as well. He is going to be a burden on the workhouse. He's going to be a weight for them, a difficulty, a challenge, an extra mouth to feed, because he has lived. And why did he live? Because he fought with nature and he won. Oliver Twist is someone who fights and struggles. Okay, he didn't just give up and die. He won this first battle. It also says that his life is going to be full of battles. Fight after fight after fight to survive. As Oliver gave this first proof of the free and proper action of his lungs, the patchwork coverlet which was carelessly flung over the iron bedstead rustled. The pale face of a young woman was raised feebly from the pillow. and a faint voice imperfectly articulated the words, "Let me see the child and die." The surgeon had been sitting with his face turned towards the fire, giving the palms of his hands a warm and a rub alternately. As the young woman spoke, he rose, and advancing to the bed's head, said, with more kindness than might have been expected of him, "Oh, you must not talk about dying yet." "Lord bless her dear heart, no," interposed the nurse, hastily depositing in her pocket a green glass bottle, the contents of which she had been tasting in a corner with evident satisfaction. "Lord bless her dear heart, when she has lived as long as I have, sir, and had 13 children of her own, and all of 'em dead except 2, and then in the workus with me, she'll know better than to take on in that way, bless her dear heart. Think what it is to be a mother, there's a dear young lamb do." Apparently, this consolatory perspective of a mother's prospects failed in producing its due effect. The patient shook her head and stretched out her hand towards the child. The surgeon deposited it in her arms. She imprinted her cold white lips passionately on its forehead, passed her hands over her face, gazed wildly round, shuddered, fell back, and died. They chafed her breast, hands, and temples, but the blood had stopped forever. They talked of hope and comfort. They had been strangers too long. "It's all over, Miss Thingummy," said the surgeon at last. "Ah, poor dear, so it is," said the nurse, picking up the cork of the green bottle, which had fallen out on the pillow, as she stooped to take up the child. "Poor dear." "You needn't mind sending up to me if the child cries, nurse," said the surgeon, putting on his gloves with great deliberation. "It's very likely it will be troublesome. Give it a little gruel if it is." He put on his hat, and, pausing by the bedside on his way to the door, added, "She was a good-looking girl, too. Where did she come from?" "She was brought here last night," replied the old woman, "by the overseer's order. She was found lying in the street. She had walked some distance, for her shoes were worn to pieces. But where she came from, or where she was going to, nobody knows." The surgeon leaned over the body and raised the left hand. "The old story," he said, shaking his head. "No wedding ring, I see. Ah, good night." The medical gentleman walked away to dinner, and the nurse, having once more applied herself to the green bottle, sat down on a low chair before the fire, and proceeded to dress the infant. What an excellent example of the power of dress young Oliver Twist was! Wrapped in the blanket which had hitherto formed his only covering, he might have been the child of a nobleman or a beggar. It would have been hard for the haughtiest stranger to have assigned him his proper station in society. But now that he was enveloped in the old calico robes which had grown yellow in the same service, he was badged and ticketed, and fell into his place at once. A parish child, the orphan of a workhouse, the humble, half-starved drudge, to be cuffed and buffeted through the world, despised by all, and pitied by none. Oliver cried lustily. If he could have known that he was an orphan, left to the tender mercies of churchwardens and overseers, perhaps he would have cried the louder. And so I read the second half of that chapter in one go, bringing us to the end. So it's not a very long chapter, and I hope you enjoyed it. Sadly, we won't get to read the rest of the novel in the same way. Even if we were in the classroom, I think it would be challenging for us to finish the whole novel in one lesson a week over the next 6 weeks. Have a go at question 3. You can think of question 3 as a bit of an extension question. You should try and answer it in a couple of sentences, a full paragraph or 2, if you can manage it, with the ideas that Dickens is trying to engage with. And there you have it, 8x2. There's your lesson for today. Hopefully you find it not too challenging. A little bit of vocabulary work, some reading together, and then some questions to answer, just to check your comprehension and for you to think a little bit deeper about maybe what's happening in that chapter. Okay? And how our main character, our protagonist, Oliver Twist, is introduced to us. So, I wish you the best of luck. I also wish you a fantastic weekend. And I ask you to keep healthy and to keep safe and to keep well. And let's all look forward to that time when we all get to meet in the classroom once again. Take care and goodbye.